Good morning. My name's Kristen McEntyre, and I'm happy to serve as today's, excuse me, thank you, today's service coordinator. This morning, our minister, Dr. Reverend Leon Dunkley, will provide today's reflection, Sacred Escape. If you are new to North Chapel, welcome. If you are visiting, please consider signing the guest book at the back of the sanctuary. And lastly, if you haven't done so already, would you take a moment to turn off your phone? This morning, I would like to share these UU opening words from Laura Wallace. Determined seed. As frozen earth holds the determined seed, this sacred space holds our wariness, our worry, our laughter, and our celebration. Let us bring seed and soul into the light of thought, the warmth of community, and the hope of love. Let us see together, hear together, love together. Let us worship.
We have the keys right here in our hands. What shall we do with them? Sometime in the 1970s, a Universalist minister named Rick Maston wrote a poem entitled The Homesick Snail. It was quite short. It had only 2 lines, one rhyming couplet. Maston's words were these: "The homesick snail goes slithering down his silver track, looking for the very thing he carries on his back." 1,000 years earlier, a Tibetan minister named Milarepa wrote a poem entitled Song to the Rock Demoness. This poem was short as well, but it was twice as long as The Homesick Snail. Milarepa's words were these: "River, ripples, and waves, these 3, when emerging, arise from the ocean itself. When disappearing, they disappear into the ocean itself. Habitual thinking, love, possessiveness, these 3, when arising, arise from the Aliyah consciousness itself." Both poets were trying to set us free. And for a very long time, we have been kind of imprisoned. There's a strong theme in Unitarian Universalism that demonstrates this feeling of being partially caught. Hymn number 155 in our hymnal, we won't sing it today, but the words of this hymn are: "Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace for all of us imprisoned, circle for release. Circle for the planet and circle for each soul. For the children of our children, keep the circle whole." Milarepa's imprisonment was obvious, and great violence was born of his struggles. Maston's imprisonment was not obvious. It was not obvious at all, and neither is ours. In a longer poem called The Prisoners, Rick Maston writes, "Though I have seen photos of those rugged, weary men, still I think I envy them, the prisoners. Caught and confined in some good and holy war, which every war has been. Stubbornly clinging to secret information for which I'd rather die than tell, caught in a roach and rat-infested cell, my eye fixed on that thin sliver of hope, the crack of light that keeps us alive in our solitary confinement." Yes, there have been times when I wished that it were a simpler prison, for out here, in this giant field of sunshine, it is far, far more difficult to plan the great escape. Was Jesus such a prisoner? When, after he was crucified, he was entombed and left for dead? Was Jesus a biblical escape artist? Was he the original Houdini? Maston wrote, "Yes, there have been times when I wished it were a simpler prison, for out here in this giant field of sunshine, it is far, far more difficult to plan the great escape. It's easier for us today, easier to plan the great escape. We are no longer in a giant field of sunshine, like the ones that the poets imagined. We are much more constrained by our predicament. It's easier now for us to plan a great escape these days. We may feel compelled to make plans. But where do we go for advice? Who will help us? If you were going to ask someone for help in the planning of the great escape from our contemporary prison, to whom would you turn? I think that I would turn to Harry Houdini. Harry Houdini, who knew how to break out of the prisons of our world. That was how he made his living, and he was really great at it. If you wanted to break free of something, Harry Houdini was your man. He could show you the way to do it. In fact, for a long time, he was considered to be the world's greatest escape artist. Of course, he didn't start out that way. He came from humble beginnings. When he first started out, he was only doing magic tricks. And this I quote, as a magician, I wanted to say musician, I almost couldn't, which he is not. Okay, as a magician, Harry got off to a somewhat rough start. To begin with, his act focused mainly on card tricks. He called himself the king of the cards. Perhaps he already had a flair for the dramatic. It wasn't until he challenged a police officer, telling him that he could escape from his handcuffs, that he would attract the attention of the media. And obviously that captured the public's imagination for a while. Escaping from handcuffs would become his bread and butter. He called himself the king of the handcuffs at that point. And it wasn't long, however, until he started to develop his act, and it became much more dramatic and much more dangerous. Some of his most famous acts including escaping from milk cans, from water torture, straitjackets while suspended in midair, jail cells, uniquely designed handcuffs created especially to thwart him by master locksmiths, being buried alive, underwater coffins, and even in the stomach of a beached whale or a sea monster. Truth be told, I have wanted to escape from the belly of a sea monster my entire life. Because it reminds me of the story of Jonah. Who doesn't want to be like Jonah? Do you remember the story from the book of Jonah? It says that the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise and go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." God said unto Noah, "Go ye to Nineveh." God couldn't have been more clear, and Jonah was a very good man. But he didn't want to go to Nineveh. Absolutely not. Jonah didn't listen to God. In fact, Jonah set out in the opposite direction, and he tried to hide from God which is perhaps the most profound of prisons. Not even Harry Houdini could escape from a choice like this. The Bible continues, saying, Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish, to flee the presence of the Lord, so that when he went down to Joppa, he found a ship that was going to Tarshish, and he paid the fare and went on the journey with them to Tarshish to escape the presence of the Lord. Jonah never made it to Tarshish. He had every intention to, but a storm confronted the vessel he was traveling in. And to please the turbulent sea, Jonah was thrown overboard. Then, famously, he was swallowed up by a whale who brought him to Nineveh. Yeah. So much for running away from God. So in the end, the whale delivers Jonah to the people who needed him most, the people of Nineveh, who were fighting amongst themselves, stealing from one another, and dishonoring the holy every day. The Ninevites were mortal enemies of Jonah's people, but he went to them and he loved them anyway, like Jesus. And if you're sensing that, you're right to sense that because it's in the theology. And don't let that word get you down if it tries to. As the late James Cone reminds us, theology is the act of loving God with your mind. So if you're feeling love, which is to say, if you're picking up on the theology, then you can sense that the Jesus energy in the story that was just shared. It's intentional. As I just learned from a scholar online, there's a passage in 1 Corinthians that explains this more deeply, explains what's going on here. Verse 45 to 47 in chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians reads, So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being, and the last Adam, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural, and after that, the spiritual. The first man was of the dust of the earth, the second man is of heaven. The scholar applies this passage to the reading of Jonah, saying, and this I quote, the Bible talks about two Adams that were in the world. The first Adam became a living soul, the first man to be created in the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis, and the second Adam, a symbolic picture of the man who did everything that the first Adam could not do, which was to fulfill God's law perfectly and to give his life to the world through his death. In other words, the second Adam was Jesus Christ. And here's the coolest part. The book of Jonah is almost like a combined account that symbolizes the story of both Adams. The Adam that disobeyed and hid from God, and ultimately brought sin and death to the world, which is kind of heavy in our theology. And the second Adam, who is Christ, who brought salvation to the world by laying down his life. Both of them are contained within the story of Jonah and the whale. Jonah, as the scholar explains, is an encapsulation of both of these Adams. Jonah is the Garden of Eden Adam, when he tries to hide from God and runs away from his home, away from his family, away from his place of origin. Essentially and symbolically, he is cast out from the garden. He is the Garden of Eden Adam when he stows himself aboard the cargo ship that is bound for distant Tarshish, and Jonah is the Jesus Adam when he finds himself in the sea of troubles and is sacrificially cast overboard to please the raging sea. Essentially and symbolically, Jonah is crucified. Jonah is the Jesus Adam when he is swallowed up by the whale, a fate that no earthly man survives. And then for 3 days and nights, he is transported to Nineveh, not unlike Jesus in the tomb. And when he is delivered to Nineveh, miraculously emerging from the belly of the whale entirely unscathed, which is, of course, astonishing, not so unlike when Jesus rolled away the stone. All of this happens, of course, within us, by the way. These energies are things that are happening within us. The freedom struggle happens within us. The great escape takes place within us. We know this, of course, as children, but we forget it over time. Over time, we slowly become more and more convinced of, more and more cleaved to, more and more convicted by our self-righteousness. It feels good to be right, especially when we aren't. We become imprisoned by the misfiring of our own good nature. Tara Brach reminds us of this cute story of this little boy who was talking to his teacher about the whales. And I imagine that he must have had a fear of whales somehow, a fear of being swallowed up by one. In an effort to calm the boy, the teacher said that it was physically impossible for a whale to swallow a human. Even though whales are large in size, they are mammals with very small throats, which is true. And the little boy said, "But the whale swallowed Jonah." And the teacher said, "No, actually, that didn't happen. That's a biblical story. A whale just can't swallow a human." So the little boy said, "Well, when I get to heaven, I'll ask Jonah." And the teacher said, "Yeah? Well, what if Jonah isn't there? What if Jonah went to hell?" And the little boy said, "Well, then you ask him." That's a satisfying story to tell. The little boy's teacher was a realist. Realism is a dangerous prison, especially when it functions like a default mechanism. Realism is why we need whimsy. It's why we need fantastical things, so that we don't just go straight to hell, like that boy's teacher was in the process of doing. So it's so easy to do. It's so easy to get ourselves all locked up. And when we do, it's so hard to escape the habits of our own thoughts. That's where it's often that's where we are often most deeply and most impenetrably imprisoned, looking for the things that set us free, that are right before us, and failing, just like that homesick snail. We need to be aware of ourselves, and we need to be aware of one another. We need to be mindful of the ways in which we tend to think. We need to be careful about what we believe, about our assumptions, because there is an order to things. Whether or not that order is logical remains the subject of much debate, but there is an order to things, and Gandhi reminds us of things for his famous saying, "Our beliefs create our thoughts, and our thoughts become our words become our actions become our habits become our character, and our character becomes our destiny." When we are imprisoned, we can choose otherwise. It's belief to thought, to word, to action, to habit, to character, to fate. When we cannot make the choice that sets us free, we can choose otherwise. When we do not choose, we simply cannot escape our prisons, especially the ones of our own making. Tara Brach told the story about the little boy and Jonah and his teacher who could not break free of her own thoughts. She told also a story of a man who could break free, about a world-famous man who broke free for a living. She said, "There's a story that I've always liked about Houdini, very much at the beginning of his career. He would travel around and wow groups of people. He would amaze them. He'd be put in straitjackets and put into a cell, and he'd find his way out of the straitjacket, and he'd unlock the cell and so on. When he did this, he went through the circuit, traveling, performing, but there was one little town in Ireland where things did not go so well. He was able to get right out of the straitjacket, but he was fiddling with the lock. He couldn't do it, and this infuriated him. He knew that this day would come eventually when he would not be able to escape, but he didn't want it to happen so early in the journey. So he tried and tried and tried, and he couldn't do it. So finally he gave up, and he asked the guy who was in charge. He said, okay, what's the deal with this sophisticated new lock? I don't get it. I've never seen or encountered anything like it. And the guy's response was, oh, this is a very ordinary kind of lock. I just never locked it. I never locked it in the first place. You've been trying to get yourself out of a lock that wasn't locked. I don't know if this story is actually true, but I do know that it's real, and I don't know that if I care if it's actually true. I do know that I want it to be true, and that's enough. I do know that my soul longs to be free, especially now. Speaking of our great longing to be free, last week, when we talked about Jesse Jackson's death and the sorrow that travels with this news, I forgot to share what Cornel West said about it. Is it okay if I share that quote now? Clear glass of water. Cornel West said, I'm still in very deep grief and mourning for my dear brother, the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr. He's the product of the Black prophetic tradition that goes way back to Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. Martin King died saying what? America is more and more becoming a spiritually sick and morally decadent society because integrity, honesty, and decency are being pushed to the margins. It's all about money, 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 power, power, power with no mechanism of accountability of the strong to protect the weak, to protect those who Sly Stone called everyday people. Now, apart from the genius of Jesse Jackson, given his humanness and his faults and foibles, was that he was trying to keep alive a lifting of voices, which is the anthem of the Black freedom movement, voices that are self-critical because we know that all of us are flawed. All of us are cracked vessels trying to love our crooked neighbors with our crooked hearts. So it's not a question of skin pigmentation or gender or sexual orientation. The question is, how do we talk about regeneration? How do we talk about revitalization? How do we talk about the renaissance of integrity, honesty, decency in service to others? And to this, Brother Jackson gave his all. End quote. What a beautiful choice that Jesse made to give his all in this way. What a beautiful choice to be free of that which tried to imprison him, to be free of that which tries to imprison us all. What a beautiful and sacred escape. The new Houdini. The wise ones say that change is inevitable, but growth is optional. It forever remains the project of those who know the deep flow of spirit and the currents of life to get ourselves out of the damaging places that we can get ourselves into, to move out from the sorrows and back into the joys of life, to break out of our prisons and find freedom once again, to side with love in honor of grace, to cherish life and to nurture the sacred escape that keeps us free. To side with love is to do the unimaginable, like Jonah did, like Houdini did, like Milarepa did. Jetsun Milarepa lived 1,000 years ago. He was a Tibetan Siddha. A Siddha is a wise elder. He wasn't always a wise elder. There was this journey of slow becoming. When Milarepa was young, he was famously known because he was a murderer. He turned to Buddhism later in life, and he became one of Tibet's most profound practitioners and poets. Milarepa found a way to escape the murderous years of his youth. He chose to redeem himself. He chose to be free. He chose the way of peace. He chose sanctuary. And so can we. We have the keys. What shall we do with them? An old friend, Universalist poet named Rick Maston wrote a very short poem of 2 lines, 1 rhyming couplet. Rick Maston's words were these. The homesick snail goes slithering down his silver track, looking for the very thing he carries on his back. What do you carry? Right now I carry about 45 middle-aged men who used to be good singers on my back, who now are friends of spirit and will always be. I carry their love for one another and their fierce humor, which isn't always funny, and their fierce love, which never fails. Those teachers, those moments of inspiration are in us and everywhere around us. There's a radical Christian saying that said, the kingdom of God is in you and is everywhere around you, and everywhere you go, you carry a little piece of heaven. There's a blues artist that says, all of heaven is buried in your heart. Not so far away, you can touch it with both hands. The keys are in your hands. The keys are in our hands. The question is, what shall we do with them? Maybe so. Blessed be, and amen.